Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping right into a really fascinating historical and theological concept, justice in Islam. We're going to dive deep into how these ancient principles were originally put together, look at their foundations, and then, crucially, do a reality check. How does that foundational theory actually stack up against modern practice? Let's get into it. The source material kicks things off with a massive, universal question. I mean, think about it. Despite thousands of years of human civilization, unbelievable technological leaps, and building these hyper-complex societies, have we actually achieved true justice? It's a heavy way to start, for sure, but it perfectly sets the stage for what we're exploring today.
Because, look, that lack of true justice definitely isn't for a lack of trying on our part. Over millennia, humanity has experimented with pretty much everything under the sun. We've seen ancient monarchies rise and fall, sprawling democracies take shape, and modern juggernauts like capitalism and communism try to organize the world. And yet, after all this immense societal engineering, a perfectly just system still feels completely out of reach for a huge portion of the globe.
So let's move into our first section, more than just courts. We're going to look at how this framework fundamentally redefines justice, pulling it completely out of the courtroom and dropping it squarely into the rhythm of our daily human interactions.
You see, in the Islamic framework, justice isn't just some rigid legal term tossed around by lawyers and judges. It's actually presented as a complete lifestyle. It dictates interactions with absolutely everyone. We're talking about how you treat your parents, your kids, your spouse, your business partners, the government, and remarkably, even your enemies on the battlefield. The core idea here is that fair treatment is a universal baseline. It's not a privilege that changes based on someone's identity, their bank account, or their social status. To really anchor this idea, the text highlights a core Quranic principle that sets an incredibly high bar. It says, "Do not let the hatred of a people prevent you from being just. Be just. That is nearer to righteousness." Now, that is a direct challenge to baseline human nature, isn't it? It demands that personal vendettas or deep national enmities literally never compromise objective fairness. It's an easy concept to talk about, but an extraordinarily difficult standard to actually live out.
That brings us to Section 2, Equality Before the Law. Let's transition and see how this broad, all-encompassing definition applies when things do get legal and people end up before a judge.
The script brings up this famous historical quote from the Prophet of Islam, and it really shows just how uncompromising this legal framework is meant to be. He stated, "If my daughter Fatima stole, I would apply the law to her." I mean, just think about the weight of that statement for a second. It sets a definitive standard with zero room for exceptionalism. The legal foundation relies on absolute equality. So not even the ultimate leader's own beloved family gets a pass when a rule is broken.
And there's this historical anecdote the text uses that really brings this concept to life. There was a time when a reigning caliph, so the absolute ultimate ruler of the era, and a common, everyday citizen ended up in the exact same court over a dispute. The presiding judge offered absolutely no special chair, no grand protocol, no deference whatsoever to the ruler. They were treated as complete equals. Keep in mind, this happened during an ancient era when kings and emperors everywhere else in the world literally considered themselves to be the law. Moving on to Section 3, Economics and Minority Rights. As you'll see, this framework extends way beyond criminal courts. It dives deep into the everyday economy and the strict protection of vulnerable groups. For non-Muslim minorities living within this system, the source outlines these strict, historically unprecedented protections baked right into the foundation. We're talking absolute guarantees for the protection of life, property, and freedom of worship. But it went even further. The state was actually held responsible for actively protecting minority religious sites and allowing those specific communities to govern themselves by their own religious laws. It's a really fascinating early blueprint for systemic religious freedom and autonomy.
Economically, the text lays out specific mechanisms built right into the framework to ensure fairness. It mandates a wealth tax for charity, known as zakat. It enforces incredibly strict inheritance laws designed to purposefully disperse wealth among a wide net of relatives. And it strictly forbids usury, or charging interest. When you put all these together, these tools are designed to prevent money from just hoarding at the very top. By keeping capital moving, it actively protects the weakest members of society and makes economic justice a structural reality.
All right, Section 4, Modern Parallels. How do these centuries-old religious principles actually stack up when we compare them against our contemporary global standards?
Well, when you draw a direct conceptual parallel, you find something genuinely striking.
Today, we have the United Nations modern language fiercely advocating for universal human rights, the strict rule of law, and transparent accountability. But as the text points out, many of these exact ideals that the global community strives for today were actually framed centuries ago. Except back then, they were structured as strict, non-negotiable moral and religious duties within this early framework, long before modern international law even existed.
Which leads us to Section 5, Principles versus Practice. Here is where we have to pause and create a vital, honest distinction between theoretical ideals and actual human actions.
We absolutely cannot shy away from the negative here. A frank look at many modern societies today reveals some pretty grim realities. Systemic issues like severe oppression, widespread bribery, blatant nepotism, unfortunately, they're incredibly common. And these actions directly and severely contradict the beautiful foundational texts and historical standards we've just been reviewing.
This brings up a crucial point for any critical thinker. The source argues that any honest analysis of a religion or an ideology requires us to look at the massive gap between its core principles and how its followers actually behave in the real world. Simply put, you cannot judge the merit of the rulebook solely by the actions of the players who are actively breaking the rules.
So, when we observe this injustice, when we turn on the news and see bribery or oppression prevalent in these modern societies, we have to ask a really hard-hitting question. Is the system itself fundamentally flawed, or are the followers of today simply failing to practice the principles they claim to uphold? It demands that we as observers separate the pristine foundational text from the deeply flawed individual.
Because if those original principles were perfectly applied, the text invites a highly compelling vision for an ideal society. Think about it. A place where power is always held subject to justice, where wealth is viewed as a heavy social responsibility rather than just an elite privilege, where even battlefield enemies receive undeniably fair treatment, and where fundamental human honor is unconditionally safe and protected.
And this leads us to a powerful, unyielding conclusion regarding this entire philosophy, which the text summarizes perfectly. Justice is the foundation upon which peace, freedom, and human dignity can survive. That is a bold claim. It asserts that without this comprehensive, unbending form of justice acting as the absolute bedrock of a society, literally every other goal, whether that's immense economic prosperity, geopolitical stability, or individual liberty, will eventually crumble and fail.
So, after reviewing all these principles, from uncompromising courtroom equality to structural economic balance and minority protections, I'll leave you with this. Is this ancient, comprehensive framework the very concept of justice that humanity is still desperately searching for today? It definitely leaves us with a whole lot to think about. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I will catch you on the next one.